Well, players.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Appreciate everyone coming out again today. It's tough weather. Couple weeks in a row.
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna try to get through as much as we can today. Hopefully, we'll get through it at least Rule 9 and maybe hopefully into 10. Probably won't get past that, but there's a lot of stuff that happened over the weekend on TV, and a lot of what we're talking about today is going to cover some of that. We haven't heard anything officially from the USJ about Rule 10-2B, but once we hear that, we'll obviously share it with you guys. But that will be an interesting thing once that comes out. I think I was telling some people here earlier. I think to sum it up after this week, we can conclude that everything's back to normal. Referees are making mistakes. People are talking about the rules and complaining about them and saying how bad they are, and so it's just like normal. New rules, same normal. So with that, let's go ahead and get started here with Rule 7. So Rule 7, ball search, finding and identifying your ball. So again, these purpose statements really just outline what the rule is talking about. So Rule 7 allows the player to take reasonable actions to fairly search for his or her ball after each stroke. But the player still needs to be careful because you can't just, and the key word here is fairly search. So we need to make sure that golfers are fairly searching. Yeah, Jim.
Maybe the best language in the rule is between the little thing that tells you how it fits into the theory. Oh, no, wait, where is this? Oh, yeah.
Is it a different rule that had it?
No. Yeah, no, it's that first bullet point. The whole rule is summed up in reasonable actions are allowed.
Right.
Excessive actions are disallowed.
Right.
Period.
Right. And then it's on us to determine what is fair and what is excessive. And I think that's something that it shouldn't be too difficult to do. But basically what I tell people is that the player can't go in and start searching for something thinking that, hey, if I do find my ball in here, my next shot's going to be a heck of a lot easier. Mm-hmm. So as long as they don't have that kind of attitude going into when they're searching for it, they're going to be fine. It's going to be fair, and they're going to be able to do that. They're not going to have any issue if the ball is accidentally moved while they're trying to search for it. But we did talk about something here before we got started. Was we have to make sure that they are indeed trying to find it or trying to search for it, because if they aren't technically searching for it, then we're going to have another issue. But before we get into the deep, let's just go through a couple definitions that are in this and are going to be in a lot of the rules that we cover today. Sorry. All right. So the definition of improve. Sorry, if you guys are on the call, I'm gonna have to mute you or if you can mute yourself. There's a lot of background noise here. I reserve the right to mute anyone if I hear a toilet flushing in the background or a dog barking at any point in time during the conference.
Or my clock chiming. That was the one that got him. Yeah.
Yep. So to improve, to alter one or more of the conditions affecting the stroke or other physical conditions affecting play so that a player gains a potential advantage for a stroke. So I think here, again, the key word is a potential advantage. That's how we're defining what it means to improve. So that means that's not only for our lie, but for our area of intended stance, and for our area of intended swing as well that we're looking at this, as well as our lie. Then in the rule here, it talks about there's a definition inside of a definition, conditions affecting the stroke, and that definition: the lie of the player's ball at rest, the area of intended swing, the area of intended swing and stance, the line of play, and the relief area where the player will drop or place the ball. All these are parts that we need to be careful about, so that those areas, or those I guess they're all areas, but aren't improved by actions that the golfer's taking, the caddy is taking, or their partner, or their partner's caddy in a team event. So the area of intended stance includes both where the player will place his or her feet and the entire area that might reasonably affect how and where the player's body is positioned in preparing for and making the intended stroke. The area of intended swing includes the entire area that might reasonably affect any part of the backswing, the downswing, or the completion of the swing for the intended stroke. And then, as it says here, there are more definitions within a definition. It's like a continuous rat hole. You just keep going and going and going in these rules, it seems like. But you can see that there's other, yeah, exactly, simplified and easier, right?
Just keep telling yourself that.
Yeah. But these are things that have been pillars of the rules of golf for a long time. Really, the two main principles that were written back when they originally rewrote the rules back in the 60s, I believe, by Richard Tufts, was, play the course as you find it, and play the ball as it lies. And these are two main principles that we'll see a lot in these rules that we're going to cover today. So again, we're getting back to, okay, what is fairly searching for the ball? Okay, and really it's again, just sometimes you're going to have to go in that tall grassy area, and you're going to have to move your hands around to find the ball. Now, one change for 2019 is that now the player can search for their ball and not incur a penalty for moving it, whereas prior, the player was not encouraged to search for the ball, because if they accidentally moved the ball during search, they got a penalty. And so a lot of times, we all saw, we were out there searching for balls in heather or tall grass, and the player was standing outside looking and watching a search, and it's like, yeah. But now that player can get in the weeds with you and start scratching around and trying to find the ball without any fear of penalty, provided again that they're not doing anything excessive that could give them an advantage for their stroke. So some of the things you can do: move sand, move water, bending grasses, tree branches, anything that's attached. But you can't break it if you're trying to do that for the purpose of making your next stroke easier. So again, if something breaks while you're searching for it, if you're fairly searching for it, okay. But if you're purposely going in there and saying, hey, I'm going to clear out a few branches here while I search for it, because I know that my next shot will be easier without those branches there, then we've got a problem. Okay, and then this is just saying here that if the lie or the area of intended swing or stance, or the relief area, or any of those things that we talked about before, if there is improvement, but it results as a result of fair search, we're okay. There's no penalty. And again, if we have exceeded what is reasonable or what is a fair search, then we are going to get a general penalty, 2-stroke penalty in stroke play, or match play, a loss of hole penalty. And it's saying here that if a player needs to find or identify their ball, they can remove loose impediments, as allowed in Rule 15.1. We'll talk about a few situations in the sand where they can do a few other things and remove things in order to find it. You can also remove movable obstructions. So if we think that the ball is in a garbage bin on the course, we can move that or dump it out, whatever we need to do to make sure that the ball is indeed in a movable obstruction or near it.
I think this is a change in the definition of lie. But Jeannie, it now says, maybe it did before too, that loose impediments and movable obstructions are not part of the law.
Loose impediments were never part of the lie, which was a
okay, and movable obstructions.
Well, movable obstructions is completely different.
Well, except I think the definition of lie says that.
It does say
But it
that.
didn't used to say that.
That's,
Yeah,
I'm having a hard enough time with the new stuff and trying to forget the old.
All right.
I've got all the old numbers in here.
Out with the old in with the new, right? All right. So when it comes to rules, what to do if sand is affecting the lie of the player's ball? So if, for example, we have our ball is plugged in a bunker, we see it go in there, but we have to find that ball. So a lot of times you'll see that we'll grab a rake and we'll start moving sand so that we can hopefully move the ball. That's okay. It's always has been okay. Still is okay. But if we do find it in that sand, then we're going to have to recreate the lie in that case. So push the sand back up, but we can leave a little part of the ball visible so that the player can see the ball in that case. So that's a common scenario that I'm sure will happen at least one time in GAM tournaments this year. It seems to always happen. And a lot of times it's something that you're right there and you see it go in, and hopefully it's easier. But sometimes it's a bunker and you look around it, you can't find anything, and then you realize, well, it's got to be in this bunker here, and then you start grabbing the rake, raking it, whatever. The player can go around with the club with their hand and find that. And then if the player doesn't recreate the lie though after they do that, they're going to get the general penalty there. All right, so how do you identify a ball? I mean, this is pretty basic, but you can, by seeing the ball come to rest in circumstances where it's known to be the player's ball, by seeing the identifying mark on the ball. And the same as always, it's not required that the player puts an identifying mark on the ball, but it is recommended because we'll talk about a situation in a little bit where if they don't have an identifying mark on it, they could get screwed. So we always recommend it, and a lot of the players in our events, specifically the higher level events, are playing similar golf balls. So having a different, unique mark is important. So that's a good question. Has a little part of the ball visible been better defined? I don't know if it's really been better defined, Joe. I think really what you can think about it is that if you can see it when you're taking your stance, I guess for someone with good eyes or someone with bad eyes, it might be a little bit different. But I mean, we're really talking about a few dimples here, where we can actually see the ball. We're not talking about a large chunk of the ball. We're talking about a very, very small portion of the ball that can be seen after we recreate the lie in the sand. Okay, and then if we find the ball with the same brand, model, number, condition as the player's ball in the area where the player's ball is expected to be, that's okay. But this does not apply if an identical ball is in the same area and there's no way to know which one is the player's ball. And there's a rule that talks about that, which we won't cover in detail today. But basically, what it's saying is that if you hit a provisional ball, if you hit your first ball, Titleist 1, no mark. You hit your provisional ball, Titleist 1, no mark, and they end up within 2 feet of each other, you're going to always have to assume the worst in that scenario if you can't identify. So if one's out of bounds and one's in bounds, you're going to assume that the first ball went out of bounds, the other ball in bounds is a provisional. And then if they're both in bounds and you can't find it, you're going to assume that you're just going to pick one and play from that point. So it's always a good idea to put a mark on the ball. We recommend it. We typically have Sharpies in the starters boxes at all of our events so that players can do that.
So is the old concept of you and my tee shots lying out there and neither one can identify them, they're both lost, is that gone?
No.
No.
That's still,
Well,
Sure.
what do you say that question?
well, you and I both hit tee shots and they're both playing Titleist 3s and we get out there and we don't know whose is whose, they're both lost in the old book. Is that still the case?
Yeah, if it's not the same person's ball, then yes.
Okay,
yes.
but a provisional and original, you get to play.
Right. So let's say that it's both your balls, then you would just pick which one. And,
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So one small change with identifying the ball. We, as always, we can identify the ball anywhere on the golf course. That's not a problem, and the player can lift the ball, but you first need to mark it. Okay, and we need to be certain that it's reasonable for the player to actually identify their ball. If the Titleist one is up and their blue mark is up facing, they don't have a good reason to need to identify the ball at that point. But if it's flipped up on the other side and they actually do, they can. But basically what we're trying to say is that we don't want players to be able to pick up the ball whenever they want and put it back in a different way, or maybe aimed up or lined up a certain way. They have to have a reasonable a circumstance to actually identify the ball. Previously, you had to announce to your group or to someone that you're playing with that you were going to lift it to identify it. Now there's no requirement for that. And really the basis of that is just simply pace of play. If you were on one side of the fairway and I was on the other side of the fairway looking for my ball in the penalty area because I sliced the ball every time, you're not going to have to waste your time, call over to me. I'm not going to have to walk all the way over there to watch you lift to identify it. You're just going to be able to do it, but you do have to make sure that it's reasonable for you to lift it. And then obviously we need to make sure that we put it back after we've lifted to identify it, and we can't clean it more than the extent needed to actually identify it. So if there was mud covering the number and we needed to see that number, we could clear the mud to see that number. But once we do that, that's the extent to what we can clean. So it's not that you can't clean it, but only to the extent that you need to identify it. And again, this is all for parts of the course not in the putting green, because on the putting green we can always lift our ball. We don't have to have a reason for it. We can always lift it. We can always clean it if it's on the putting green. And then if we don't mark it, or we don't follow this procedure properly, we don't mark it when we lift to identify it, then we're going to have an issue. We're going to have a one-stroke procedural penalty and then move on. So you do have to mark it. Just like any time that you will be putting the ball back on the exact spot, we're going to mark our ball. Okay, and this is just saying that if we played from the wrong place or we incorrectly substituted a ball in this case, we're not going to get the additional, we're not going to get 2 + 1 = 3. It's just 2 + 1 = 2 in this case. So we wouldn't get the procedural penalty. We just get the penalty for playing a substitute ball or playing from the wrong place. Okay, and then again, we talked about this briefly before, but now if the player accidentally moves it while they're trying to find it or identify it, there's no penalty. They just put it back where it was and then continue on. One small change that we have here now is that if we don't know where the exact spot was, we're just going to estimate it and place it. So previously, if we didn't know the exact spot for places other than the putting green, we always dropped it. Now we're always going to place it if we don't know the exact spot. We're going to estimate it and place it on that point. So an example could be you're on a tee, you hit a tee shot down the fairway, your other player is playing with you, does the same thing, and it ricochets off your ball. You don't know the exact spot, but you're just going to go up there and estimate where you think it was and then put your ball there. Previously, that was a drop if you didn't know the exact spot. Now it's just a place. All right.
Questions?
Yeah.
Oh, I just wondered if we could ask questions.
Yeah, of course. Oh, you can ask questions whenever.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just learned something. If going to page 159, where they said 18.3C, if you hit your regular tee shot and you hit a provisional, and they're both in the same area, one of them's buried in the bunker in a lip, and the other one's on the side of the bunker. you have a choice
Mhm.
with no penalty. Is that correct? That's what I'm reading.
Yep. Weird, isn't it?
Yeah. Or if,
So it does say though here that so I think I misspoke earlier. It does say that if both balls are found on the course, the player must choose one of the balls so must choose one of the balls to be treated as the provisional ball, which is now in play, and the other ball is treated as lost.
yeah, but
It
there's,
must not be
there's
played.
no penalty. You can treat
So, well,
someone
no,
as-
but
you're
what it's
playing
saying is that you're hitting 4 now. So I misspoke earlier. You do get
No,
to
you still get the
choose,
penalty because you're
but
using a
but
provisional-
one of those is
not
going to
a
be
provisional
lost.
ball. Okay,
If you hit
it's still,
your T-ball, you hit your provisional ball, and
159.
you can't tell them apart.
you still get the penalty for the provisional.
A, the ball you hit next was your provisional ball.
Okay.
And basically, you've got to take the worst of the two.
Right.
I mean, that's no
It
rule
does.
and sub-rule and exception. That's just like a general
Where
thought.
does it say that?
You don't have to take the worst
I
of the
don't
two.
think
The
you do that.
result is is worse.
Yeah,
The
right.
result is worse because of the stroke and
All right.
distance penalty. But you can take the one that's
You can
out of the
choose.
bunker
That's
or
why
out of the water
I
hazard.
can't picture.
Yeah.
I've got to go back.
Right. That's
Okay.
correct. But I believe previously you had to go back to the
There were
tee,
several scenarios in the
Right.
decision.
and you had to go
If
back
both are
and
in the
hit
bunker,
5.
if one is in a bunker,
Right,
and
but
one
one
is in a
could be
water
on-
hazard, it was
Right.
all those different decisions.
Right.
Yeah.
But anyways, now going forward, if we have that situation, yes, if one's on the course and one isn't on the course, then the one on the course is treated as a provisional. If they're both on the course, they're both in play, then what you can pick which one you want,
Mhm.
but that's going to be your provisional ball. So you're still getting penalized
Right.
in that
You
case.
get penalized for that.
Still hitting 4.
If one's
Right.
in the water,
Right.
or one's in the water, in 3 inches of water, and then one's right next to it, 6 inches away on the,
On the grass.
On the grass.
You'd probably pick that one.
I'd probably do it, yeah.
Yeah. Right.
I know.
But, you know,
Hey, I mean, you might have a really good lie in the water. You know?
Yes. I mean, like Ricky.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it might be warm.
that's what I was.
All right, that's a good question. All right, any other questions about Rule 7?
But just a note that all of a sudden in 7.4 at the very end, instead of a one-stroke penalty, it goes to the general penalty.
Mm.
Which only makes sense because instead of lifting and putting back, ball was played from a different position.
Mhm.
Right. Correct.
Or if you don't
Or-
recreate it, the lie, let's say
Right.
you leave the ball uncovered in the sand, that'd be 2.
Most of them should be one. Someone-
The replacing the ball, you're saying you're placing it,
Yes.
is that somewhere else under some other rule? Because in the old book, replacing meant you could replace it by placing or you could replace it by dropping.
So it's in a few other situations as well.
So it must be under.
Kyle, isn't it in Rule 14?
I believe it is. I think it's
Okay.
14.2.
All right.
Is that right?
Thank you.
Yeah, 14.2.
Replace. Oh, must be-
And Jeannie, definition of replace is by setting it down.
So that's different. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but basically they're trying to make it simpler in that now it's just if you're always going to estimate the spot and you're going
Just
to
replace it. Okay.
place it. But I guess it's not always the case because I believe if the ball is in a movable obstruction and it's above the ground still, we're still gonna use the vertical distance to define where the ball is, but we're still dropping in that case.
Hmm.
So, but in that case, we know exactly where it is. I looked it up, but you can double check me. Because I got that question at a college clinic I did. But in that case, we know the position of the ball, and we're just taking vertical distance down because the ball isn't technically on the ground, and then we're dropping in that case. It'd be the same if the ball was sitting on a rake in the bunker, but wasn't actually touching the sand. We would drop in that case. But correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think I'm right.
Hey, Kyle, I think what it says is when you estimate that point, you have a relief area. And then when you have a relief area, it has a club length.
I don't think that's true, but
No,
I think it's when you estimate the spot, it's just the spot that you estimate.
Well, I'm looking at 15.2 A2.
Which one? 15.
It says size of the relief area.
You're right. Yep. Yeah, so you're right. So you would have a club length in that case. That diagram number 2 there is
is that on the green?
is a great example, right? Where you've got the ball that's on the towel.
Kyle, you were talking about it being on a movable obstruction on the green, weren't you?
No.
Oh, just anywhere.
Yeah, anywhere. So yeah, so John, you're right there. So in that case, for a movable obstruction, you'd have that vertical distance down, but then you'd have that one club length relief area in either direction.
Yeah, I'm not completely sure, Kyle, but I think any time that you drop the ball, you have a relief area.
That sounds right to me. Yeah,
Off the green.
that would make sense. All right.
Place on the green.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That-
All right, Rule 8. So yeah, in this case, we're going to cover this one of these central principles of the game: play the course as you find it. Okay, and obviously that's the goal is that we hole out with the ball we started, we play the course we find it, we don't have any issues, but we know that the rules in our golf games don't always make that possible. And so we'll talk about a few situations where we're going to be able to get the lie that we had or have the stance or swing that we had if something intervened after our ball was at rest. So what this is saying here, we'll just read it, is it's important. When the player's ball comes to rest, he or she normally has to accept the conditions affecting the stroke and not improve them before playing the ball. So if their ball landed in the divot hole, they're just going to have to hit it out of the divot. However, a player may take certain reasonable actions, even if they improve those conditions, and there are limited circumstances where conditions may be restored without penalty after they have been improved or worsened. So players' actions that improve conditions affecting the stroke. So again, we're playing the course as we find it. So we're talking about the lie of the player's ball at rest, the area of the player's intended stance or swing, and then the player's line of play, and the relief area where the player will drop or place a ball. So all these things are areas that we have to be careful about, again, that aren't improved by actions of the player, a caddy, or the partner or the partner's caddy. And then this is an interesting little side note here. This rule applies to actions taken both during a round and while play is stopped under Rule 5.7a. So interesting that it also includes, while play is stopped, and we also have to consider, what the round in match play continues on after that 18th hole if we're going on beyond 18. Whereas stroke play, if it's a playoff, we cut it off and then we're starting over from scratch for that playoff. So to keep that in mind as well. And again, this rule does not apply to the removal of loose impediments or removal obstructions, which is covered in 15, or an action taken while a player's ball is in motion, which is covered by Rule 11. Okay, so actions that aren't allowed. And I think that the majority of us know these, but it's always good to just kind of go over some of the basic ones that we see. We'll see this a lot at junior events. I know that's how I learned it. I was underneath a tree at Forest Acres playing in a tournament, and I did something I probably shouldn't have, and some spectator came up to me and said, you got to be careful when you're underneath a tree like that. And then I just said yes, and I probably did it again on the next hole, and then I actually learned it after that. But it's something that you'll definitely see a lot at the junior level, and really just for people that haven't played a lot of tournament golf, you'll definitely see this. But some of the things that are not allowed, if they improve the conditions affecting your next stroke, is moving, bending, or breaking any growing or attached natural objects, so a tree limb or something like that, and a movable obstruction, an integral object, or a boundary object. So an out-of-bounds stake, for example, a tee marker for the teen area where when playing a ball from that teen area. So it doesn't necessarily apply to a tee marker that's on another hole, but on the tee marker or on the teen area that you're currently playing when your ball is in there. And then what are not allowed is moving a loose impediment or removal obstruction into position, such as to build a stance or to improve the line of play. So trying to think of a good example of that, but I don't know, but
Well, I mean, here, you could take a fistful of pine needles
sure.
and put them down and then put your ball on top of pine needles. I mean, you can't,
Sure. Yeah, right. To have like a teen effect.
I mean,
or
I
such
guess you need
type
a
deal.
rule to say that. but-
Right. Okay, and then alter the surface of the ground, replacing divots and divot holes, removing or pressing down divots that have already been replaced, or other cut turf that is already in place, or creating or eliminating holes or indentations or uneven surfaces. So a common example of this is you'll see a lot of times a player hits a ball and the ball is embedded, and our embedded ball relief procedure is a little bit different, but when they take their drop from the relief area now into the embedded ball rule, they're probably not going to be able to fix that embedded mark or that pitch mark where their ball was, because it's probably going to impact their play. And so we always tell players that if it could impact your shot, don't fix it until after you're done hitting. Because if they did drop it and the ball ended up right behind that pitch mark, they can't tap it down before they play. If they did, that's going to be a 2-stroke penalty or general penalty. Yeah, Mike.
That happened a lot when we had that tournament in Detroit golf. I don't know which tournament it was.
Tournament of Champions.
Yeah, and all of them were hitting with a high ball, and 70% of them would land in a pitch mark or make a pitch mark, and it fall back about 1 inch or 2 inches, and they'd have a tuft of grass about that high right in front of the ball. To me, I thought that was kind of unfair, but you got to play it in fives. It's just.
Or you could play lift, clean, in place, and
When?
But not in a GAM tournament.
Yeah, I'm gonna say, in the friendly game at the club.
I only bring that up as a joke. But that's one reason why that's played at certain levels, is because can you imagine someone with $1 million and they have to deal
I
with that?
imagine it as a rules guy
Right.
in a cart and listening to every competitor.
Yeah.
Why?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And
Everybody plays it that way.
I'm not
Everybody plays
saying,
it that way,
yeah,
but-
exactly. That's the way it is, and that's one way to get around those situations. That's a prominent reason why they do that, is because they don't. I think at the end of the day, you want the player's skill to determine the outcome of the event, right? And you're going to get bad breaks, you're going to get good breaks. You got to play with them, but that's one good example of why they do that at the highest level, is because they don't want that to impact someone winning, $1 million versus $500,000. Tough problems that they deal with.
Yeah.
Cats. All right. The question here was, if the relief area is in a bed of pine needles, can the player remove the remove needles down to the ground to make the drop? So this goes down to pine needles are loose impediments, right? So
I mean, this one just frosts me because one of the main principles of golf is play the ball as it lies. But I've been to at least 2 national rules schools and talked to Aunt Jeannie and to Mark Wilson. Pine needles are loose impediments, and if you're in a pile of A, you can't move your ball,
right.
and B, you can't move dirt. But if you're just moving pine needles, you can tee that sucker up, and it's 100% legit.
Right. Or in this case, I think what Charles was trying to get at was that if you have someone you don't want to play from there, you can move them out of the way before you drop. That's fine.
No, you can't, because then you're dropping.
You've
If
improved
there's a
your lie.
loose impediment, like leaning against your ball, that if moving it might cause your ball to move, then you can't.
Right. We're
He's
talking about before they drop.
About taking a drop.
Before they drop.
You can clean the area where you drop the ball.
Yeah.
You can move loose impediments out of the way before you drop.
If you're in a bed of pine needles, you
You're
could,
talking about being in a bed.
Yeah.
They're talking about dropping.
Dropping. I got my ball in the hand. I'm gonna now drop it someplace.
and none of those things were affecting it.
Right. So now I can clean off. I can blow away all the
Yeah.
pine needles and create you can create a path, and putt down the hill and all that kind of stuff. That's the one that.
The other one that, a drop zone. You're taking relief in the drop zone. And you're not allowed to replace the loose divots in the drop zone before you drop.
Loose
No.
divots. No,
No.
you can remove them if they're totally loose because
Yeah.
they're loose impediments.
Right.
But you can't improve
Hmm.
the area where you drop the
That's why you
No.
make a drop zone big enough.
Right.
Well, that's another one.
Hopefully not too many people use it.
I mean, you're getting.
Right. Well, drop zones. Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. It's think about it the same way as anywhere else. You're dropping the ball. You can't fill divots before you drop. If you're you can do it after because you're caring for the course. But one interesting thing with the changes to the rules now is the drop zones are a little bit different in terms of how that relief area is defined. So I think that it'll be easier for people to make sure that they get a nice lie, because now all they need to do is just drop near the edge of the relief area or the drop zone and have it roll out. Do that twice, and then they can place it exactly where they want. Because now the ball has to stay in that drop zone. Whereas before it could hit and roll out of it, but now it has to stay in there. So smart players, and I mean, we're going to see this too. We'll get to this when we talk about relief areas, but smart players, if they really are smart, they're going to drop on the edges of the relief areas, have the ball roll out, and then have it in their hand at all times. If they're smart, they do that, and I think that's a lot of players will. But then it's going to be a challenge for us to identify where the relief area was and make sure that people aren't
Making it too big.
questioning it.
It's
Yeah.
a little bit harder to do that dropping from the knee though. When you're dropping from
True.
the air,
True.
you have
Yeah,
a
it's
better
gonna
chance
roll.
to let it roll out.
Right. It's true. All right. Some other things that are not allowed: removing or pressing down sand or soil. And then,
Good morning.
Good morning. And then remove dew, frost, or water. So again, we can't remove.
Where does it tell us now that sand and loose soil are loose impediments on the putting green, or is that gone?
I don't believe that
That's
they're
not
defined as
there
loose
anymore.
impediments anymore.
It's in Rule 13, it says you're allowed to move them.
Right, but they're not.
On the
That's
putting
all.
green?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Page 100, Gene,
Okay,
top of the page.
thank you. Uh-huh.
All right, and then again, if we do any of these actions that aren't allowed, it's going to be the general penalty: 2 strokes in stroke play, loss of hole, and match play. So this was the old 13.2, but you'll definitely see a lot of this if we have events where Muskegon Country Club, where the GAM's at this year. There's a lot of heather on that course, and making sure that they don't trample down the heather to try to improve their area of their swing. That's going to be something I'll have to look out for. You'll definitely see it at some of the junior events. That's a rule that a lot of people don't know about. They think they can, grab the branch and hold it back behind their leg when they're taking their stance. These are the types of things that we can't do. But there are some actions that are allowed.
My handicap's going up.
And in preparing for or making a stroke, the player may take any of these actions. There's no penalty, even if doing so improves the conditions affecting the stroke. So we talked about one before, fairly searching for the ball, that's okay. Taking reasonable actions to remove loose impediments and movable obstructions. So we talked about the case with the pine needles. If it does improve where the area where we're going to drop the ball, that's okay, because we're allowed to do that. And taking reasonable actions to mark the spot of the ball and to lift and replace the ball under rules 14.1 and 14.2, or ground the club lightly right in front of or right behind the ball. So if we do that and it does improve the lie, it's okay because we're allowed to do that, except in the bunker. But this doesn't allow us to press down the club and kind of create, really push down. So if you're in deep rough, if you really push, and kind of dig in right behind the ball to make it easier for your shot, that's still not allowed. But you can have the club lightly rest there, or ground it lightly, and that's okay. And then, as we said, and as we all know, in a bunker, we can't ground our club right in front of or right behind the ball. And then we some other things that we can do, we can take our stance. So, and that includes, and here in the words there, including a reasonable amount of digging in with the feet in sand or loose soil. So that's basically allowing us to take our stance in the bunker. And then fairly taking a stance to get to the ball, or basically getting to a difficult area, so maybe underneath a tree, we're still allowed to fairly take that stance. But when doing so, the player isn't entitled to a normal stance or swing. And as we've had before, we need to use the least intrusive course of action to deal with that situation. So that same principle that we've always had before, where we say, yeah, if you're trying to get to underneath the tree, you can exit from the left, the right, the front, the back. You have to choose which is the least obtrusive. Make sure I use the right word. The least obtrusive way to do that. Intrusive. So at that point, if you're there and you're with the player, you'll have to ask that player that question. Well, you can get at this ball from 4 different areas. You're gonna bend the branches in all 4 cases. Which one is the least intrusive way to do it? And that's the one that they. Oh, I mean that would be a good thing to do. I mean, what's a good synonym? You want to?
I don't have a clue. I'm not. That's the attorney over there.
Can we still do Jeannie's recommendation? I always remember this one. Have the player put both hands on the club and back into it.
Yep.
And if they break something, there's no penalty. Right, but they can't do this.
Yeah.
So if they keep both hands on the club and they just back into the area, that's fine.
Or duck under or whatever.
Yeah.
Presuming that the way that they're backing into is the right way. I mean, because I don't want to say that. I mean, it'd be left, right, front,
It's the
and
least
backwards,
intrusive.
but yeah, you're right. I mean, if they did that, put their hands on. put their hands on the club and backed into it from whatever angle is the proper angle, then yeah, that'd be
It's
fine.
gonna bend the branch.
But they could break
But,
it too,
yeah.
but they're not doing anything like
Right,
this
they're
with
not-
their hands.
They're not breaking it so that they can get in there.
They're just
They're
backing in. and
trying to-
keeping
trying to
their
get
hands on their club.
the
Get
least
stance.
obtrusive way to get the
And it
I
happens
think
to
they
snap
all-
off.
You have to use that word, actually, intrusive. To start with, it impresses.
Yeah, they think you know what you're talking about anyway, right?
Exactly. Your credibility just goes right through the roof after you use that.
I did
Goes
stay at the Holiday
someplace.
Inn last night. There you go.
Yeah, that's it.
It's called the snow job.
Yeah. Can't dazzle them with brilliance.
And then you can make a stroke, obviously, and break stuff, or the backswing for a stroke, which is then made. So key thing there is if we're underneath the tree and we take our backswing and we break a branch, better keep going, because if we stop and we don't hit it, then we're gonna have a penalty.
Penalty.
But if we keep going, we're okay. And you'll get people that will ask
The
that.
West is gonna be better than the general penalty.
Yeah,
That's correct. Yeah.
Right, correct. Because then you're going to try to tell the rules official that, I wasn't trying to do it.
Yeah.
Practice swing.
Right. Then you get the two. Take the whip.
Right.
It's only one.
But then this exception, you can see that I think we're getting close to the point where there's like an exception like every other thing. It's interesting. I think what they did when they were writing the rules was they got the basics, and then they brought out a case of beer and a box of wine and said, okay, now we're going to think about all the exceptions. And after that,
Where do we put them?
all the crazy stuff started coming up. But anyways, when we're in the bunker, we know that on our backswing, we can't touch the sand, or we can't touch anything that's in the bunker there. When we get to bunkers and hopefully next week, we'll talk about one small change with the definition of a bunker and how there's one small instance where the player is not going to be penalized when they were before when taking their backswing. But we'll get to that when we get to bunkers. And then in the teen area, actions that are allowed, you can obviously tee your ball up, move or bend or break anything growing or attached, and alter the surface of the ground, remove or press sand, or remove dew, frost, or water. So a lot of times, one of my friends growing up when I was playing, his dad always did this, and so he did it too, is on the tee on a par 3, they take their club and whack it into the ground and create a little tee, and then put the ball on the tee. I never understood why they did that. But did Gary do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That was one of the, that's way
So-
before your time.
Yeah, I've never heard of Gary Player.
No, I've never watched him play. I never watched him play, but they said this.
Black Knight.
Right. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just giving you a hard time.
You always look
He always wears black. Yeah.
Heard more about Gary Player recently when his son got in trouble. Yeah, I don't remember all the details, but that just occurred.
I don't need much. I just
He
need
was trying to make money at the Masters or at one of the big tournaments, and he ended up being sued. And
Right.
Yeah.
All right, and then another thing that we reference that we'll reference is we can care for the course. So if we're taking actions and we're caring for the course, then we're going to be absolved from penalty, and especially in a bunker. So a good example of this is if you got a long bunker, there's only one rake. It's on the right side. You can walk across, grab the rake your way back to where you are. You just have to be careful that it's not going to affect your next shot. So if you walked forward, you wouldn't want to rake on your way back to your ball, because that could be in your next area of your next shot. But if it's laterally or behind it, then we're fine, unless you are stupid enough to admit that you were raking it just in case your ball ended up there in your next shot. Then you're going to get a penalty for saying something like that.
You get an extra 2 for being stupid.
And then here, actions that are allowed. Gene, this is one of your questions earlier. On the putting green, remove sand and loose soil and repair damage. And we'll talk about repairing damage. All that's covered in 13, as John was saying, but that is allowed on the green. And then we can move an object to see if it's loose. But if the object is found to be growing or attached, it must stay and be returned as nearly as possible to its original position. Yeah, Jim.
You know, last week we talked about the little clause in the teeing area rule that said it also included the area above the ground. And I thought, that's not right. If you break off a branch of a tree, even in the teeing area, that counts. Well, here, in the big book, page 120, it says that. I mean, if you need the authority for it, it says, yeah, it goes above the ground, but it doesn't extend to allowing you to improve the area of swing by, for example, breaking branches
Oh,
on a
okay.
tree.
That's before you take your stroke. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
I think it sounds like you break. Why does it say here that I can move, bend, or break? Did I write it down wrong? What number was that? What decision?
It's at page 120 in the big book at the bottom.
What you're saying is in the top of page 121, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it
Yeah,
runs from
on
the
the
bottom to
bottom.
the top.
Yeah.
It's hanging over.
Which is what the-
/5.
Yeah, but that
Okay.
stupid
Yeah.
language in the team thing said it goes up, you know, like for
Right.
example, out of bounds goes up
Yeah.
and down, penalty area goes up and down. That was making it sound like team area went up and
Right.
down, but it doesn't.
It doesn't.
And this is the one that says it doesn't.
Right, that's the
Okay, I see
exception.
what you're saying.
The language in the rule says or above the ground when you're
Right.
talking about teeing it, but that must just be so that you can put your ball on the tee.
Right. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, hopefully, when we're setting the tees, that we don't put it in a situation. But yeah, I know that it's happened before. I mean, I've had to move the tee at Gowney on the first hole there because it was set too close to a branch, and we had, you know, and that just comes with being, you know, doing it more often. But we have, when we're setting tees, we're also thinking about, you know, right-handed players, left-handed players, where they're going to tee it up. I mean, if you watch Phil Mickelson play, he tees it up in 1,000 different places on 18 holes. And so that's really what we're thinking about when we are setting the tees, is that everywhere the player hits, right-handed, left-handed, they don't have any interference from trees.
But in the teeing area, you can bend break down at the ground.
Right, but not above. Even though
I guess
it's
not way above.
right, sure.
And that's good. The greenkeepers like that. They don't want trees around their teeing areas or greens anyway, so cut them all down. Because you can't grow grass on
Right.
trees.
Take the branch out.
All right, Rule 8.1C, avoiding penalty by restoring conditions improved of the breach of rule, the rules that we just talked about. The player has improved the conditions affecting the stroke by moving, bending, or breaking an object in breach of Rule 8.1A1, or moving an object into position in breach of Rule 8.1A2. There is no penalty if, before making the next stroke, the player eliminates the improvement by restoring the original conditions in the ways allowed in 1 and 2 below. Which, here we go. But if the player improves the conditions affecting the stroke by taking any of the other actions covered by the other rules in 8.1, he or she cannot avoid penalty by restoring the original conditions.
Take the branch.
So basically, if this comes up on the course,
There's a thing in the big book that says that.
we need to make sure that we reference this, because you have to have a PhD to
get
understand all these iterations of what could happen. All kidding aside. So how to restore conditions improved by moving, bending, or breaking objects. So before making the stroke, the player may avoid penalty for breach by restoring the original object as near as possible to the original position so that the improvement created by the breach is eliminated. So a good example of this is previously, if you moved an out of bounds stake, that was an automatic penalty. Even if you put it back, there was no penalty. Now what this is saying is that if I remove the out of bounds stake, which I can't do, as long as I put it back and as close as possible to the position that it was before, then I'm not going to get a penalty. and we'll talk about it I believe on the next slide, but there are going to be times where we just physically cannot get that thing back to where it was before. In that case, we are going to have the penalty. But a simple out of bounds stake is typically going to be pretty easy. It comes out, goes back in the same spot. You can do that and avoid a penalty now.
Can't put it back in at a different angle.
Correct. So if it was squarely in your way and you put it back and you angled it so that it wasn't in your line of play, that would still be a penalty there.
Isn't there one step further if you accidentally break it?
Right.
You can put it back in and there's still no penalty?
Well, so we'll get to that.
Okay.
Okay, and then same thing with the tree, branch, or grass or removal obstruction. If we get it back to its original position, then we'll be okay, provided that we do that before we hit. But the player cannot avoid a penalty if the improvement is not eliminated. So such as when if you let's say, for example, you see the out of bounds stake and you take it out of the way and you're pissed off and you slam it into the cart path and it bends. When you put it back, if it's bent differently, then and if it's significant, I guess in a significant way, then we're gonna have a penalty. So basically, what that is what this clause is saying here. And same thing with a tree limb. So we break a tree. We can't tape it back together and say, oh, it's good, or we can't grab some string out of our bag and tie it and say, okay, now it's good, and Jimmy rig it and not get a 2-stroke penalty.
That's a guy's rule anyway, because very few women carry duct tape in their bag.
Maybe
And so,
It's a universal man.
and it's, we all laugh, and I think it's funny as well. But it's funny that it's actually like in the rules is that's something that people actually thought about, because there'd be people like us around the world that would come up with the scenarios and ask what the ruling is.
using tape to repair a broken boundary object or branch. Interesting.
Okay, and then let's see. Tony just made a comment. It seems to say a divot cannot be unreplaced. I believe that's a case. Tony, is there a specific decision or?
It's right here on page 13, that thing that you sort of glossed over,
On page
But-
13.
73. But if the player improves the conditions affecting the stroke by taking any of the other actions covered by Rules 8 dot, that's
Right.
all on the top of page 72,
Mhm.
3 through 5.
Mhm.
So that's the replacing the divots.
Gotcha.
Obviously, if you move dew and water, you can't fix it.
What
Right.
about practice swing divots? I'm always confused with practice swing divots.
Any divot.
So these juniors are out there waiting to play for or on the fairway, and they're taking 4 or 5 swings, and all those divots that they hit in front of them, they can't replace them until they make their stroke.
If it's going to affect your
Affect
stroke.
your stroke.
I mean, so if I'm 2 feet away and I take a chunk out of the earth and then go up and grab it and put it back, it's fine. But if I'm right next to the ball, then
Most of
it
them are right
could.
next to the
If it goes in front of your ball,
Yeah.
you can't replace. You
All
can't
depends
fix
on the
that.
ability of the player
Because
too.
you
'Cause
caught
some
it.
of them might affect it and some of them might not.
I'd have to look that
On a
one up for
practice
sure.
swing, I mean, if you hit a practice swing, your ball's at rest, you hit a practice swing, take a divot, and put it right on your ball.
I think it's still a loose impediment, and
You
you'd
can
still
take
be
that
able
out.
to move it in that case.
I can't,
Yeah, replacing it is the problem.
Right.
the divot is replaced if it's in the spot with the roots down. Then it's no longer a loose impediment, then it's a replaced
Right, I
divot.
understand that, but
Right. So I think Frank's question is, and John, you clarify that for me as well. But you can remove that loose divot because it's a loose impediment, but putting it back could affect their next stroke.
Does
So
that go back to that rule where you have to play your ball at the shot you had? You know, in other words, when I hit my
but
shot at,
it's just
I should be able to hit the ball the way
Exactly.
it was when I when the ball came to rest.
You're
I
entitled
don't
to
think you
and
can
stuck
remove it
with
once it's been replaced.
Right.
the result of your last stroke.
Top of page 72.
But that-
That's one of those three things, 3 through 5.
Yeah.
Tough grass.
Right.
You didn't have that tough grass before you last
Divots
stroke.
that have already been
I
replaced.
know what you're
The
saying.
ball came with grass.
Once it's in the
So
hole.
once you replace that divot, if it does affect your next shot, you're getting 2 strokes.
Or
No, if you then
It's
try to
stuck
tamp
with
it down or remove it again, it's no longer a loose impediment once you've replaced it.
That's right.
Right.
Under the same token.
But so if I take a divot right next to my ball, I go up and I pick it up and I put it in there, and I replace it,
Mm-hmm.
I get a 2-stroke penalty, and I
No.
can't unfix that.
No, I didn't. Oh, it's right next to your ball?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Right.
It's gonna affect the lie.
But I couldn't. I think what Tony was saying was that you can't go in there and say, okay, take it out of the divot, and then it's okay.
Correct. That's
Right.
correct.
No.
Right. Yeah.
And it
Once it's
counts as being, if it's root side down,
It's
where
replaced.
the earth was scraped away, that's a replaced divot,
Mm-hmm.
no longer a loose impediment.
Right.
That's one of the biggest infractions I see in the junior tournaments, because they're waiting, it's so slow out there. I've seen some of these competitors take 4 or 5 swings, and there's stuff flying all over it, and they're taught to replace
Prepare for the
everything, and they
course.
got time, and they run up and do it. But
Yeah.
am I gonna call a penalty on them?
And
They deserve it.
I mean, I think it all comes down to that question: does it really improve their next shot? And I think most times,
I get more.
I mean, if I'm taking a divot on my practice swing, it's going to be far enough from my ball that it's not going to impact my
hope
next
it
shot.
is.
But I mean,
No. Have you
All
gone out there? and-
Hey,
I've been. I mean, most.
A couple of years ago in
Most-
Lakewood, I watched the
yeah.
same thing.
And it's-
I guess in that case, you just try to tell them, hey, fix your divots later, or collect them and put them off to the side, and then fix them.
end
after
up
you're
with a
done
golf
hitting it.
bag full of
Right.
divots.
One of the biggest things you tell us is to make sure that they replace their divots and take care of the course.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
Question is,
No,
do they
exactly.
have it? They take two shots.
Well, and it's that. I mean, I guess the other way to look at it is that you've got that going on, and the other players out there, moving their ball or kicking it away from the tree. Which one's more important to? I'm just kidding.
But to me, the important part of this discussion is not when you're standing out there in the fairway.
Right.
The important part is when you get up to the green and the player's ball is this far off the green and they're taking little chip shots and they bump the grass out onto the green, okay? Or somebody's hit a shot out of a bunker and there's all kinds of sand on the green. They're off the green. You can't remove those.
You can remove that sand.
And
You can only remove, it says you can remove it when your ball is on the green.
No, it doesn't.
No.
It's
Anytime.
You can't
Sand.
remove the sign off the green.
The only thing you can't
Green
put
is a
consideration
special
is-
area and it has its own rules, and one of them is, if the stuff is there, you can fix it, you can fix it.
Right.
Regardless of whether or not my ball is
Yep.
on the green.
Yeah.
Correct.
It's the same kind of principle for a pitch mark, or I guess now any damage on the green is if the damage is on the green, regardless of where your ball is, you can fix that
Regardless of where.
regardless of
Yeah,
it.
13.1C is clear on that.
Right.
What did he, which rule?
13.1C. And then, on the flip side is that if that stuff is off the green, then you can't fix it regardless of where your ball is.
Thank you.
Now, and I guess I say fix it. I mean, if it's a divot, you can move a loose
Unless,
impediment.
like in the next section, it's got there after your ball came to rest. You're entitled to or stuck with the results of your last shot. Somebody hits a divot on top of it, you can take it off.
In that case, yes. Mhm. Okay, how to restore conditions improved by moving an object into position before making the stroke. The player may avoid penalty for breach of Rule 8.12 2 by removing the object that was moved into position. Okay, so now we're going to get into what Jim was talking about, was restoring conditions worsened after the ball came to rest. So sometimes, as he said, you're going to have that, you're going to be in a position, and then something else is going to happen that's going to cause your lie or your area of intended swing or your stance to be different. So if the conditions affecting your stroke are worsened by any person other than the player, or by an animal or an artificial object, without penalty, the player may restore the original conditions as nearly as possible. So, for example, if your ball is sitting in the fairway and Kyle's in a hurry to get to the clubhouse because they just opened up lunch, and I'm a rules official and I run over your ball, you're going to be able to restore that your lie in as close as possible position in that case. So this definitely happens. I mean, we're out there looking for balls or driving around, and we accidentally go over a ball in the rough. It happens. We're gonna get that person's ball back in the position as close as possible to what they had prior to that outside person making some kind of action.
Can they lift and clean it at that time? Let's say you rolled over. Can they lift that marked lift and clean it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't even, in that case, I don't think would they need to mark it. I
Yeah.
think,
Yes.
Anytime
You have
you
to
lift
mark
it.
it.
Anytime you lift
mark it,
Yeah, when you lift it, you have to mark it.
even though there's probably a hole there.
right. Okay.
It says there, marked spot.
Mark the spot of the ball and lift, clean, and replace.
Please.
Yeah, I guess that's the next one. Huh?
81D.
Yep. Mark the spot of the ball and lift and clean and replace the ball in its original spot. If it's reasonable to do so, restore the original conditions, or if the material ended up on the ball when the conditions were worsened.
And if it had been run over and you don't know its exact spot and it pops up in the air, you just estimate in place.
No, correct. Correct. Yeah.
Right where it was matted down, so you get a better lie.
And then if the worsened conditions cannot be easily restored, lift and replace the ball, placing it on the nearest spot, not near the hole that has the most similar conditions affecting the stroke. So this is interesting. This doesn't say mark.
This doesn't say mark.
So I think that's why I was a little hesitant before, was that
Mhm.
I don't think you necessarily you have to mark it when you're putting it back in the exact spot. But if we're not putting it back in the exact spot, we don't have to mark the ball.
Okay.
With I guess with the exception of if we're playing lift, clean, and cheat. I think lift, clean, and cheat we would need to mark it.
Lift, clean, and cheat.
You have to put it back on.
I'm gonna put that one in my vocabulary.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and then again, we're gonna find the most similar conditions, a spot that has the most similar conditions, and then is within one club length of its original spot, and is in the same area of the course as that spot. Okay, so it's a pretty defined spot which we're trying to get the ball back in. But it could be, and this is a kind of a one example would be is that you're driving and you accidentally run over a ball in some tall rough, and it's right on the edge of the rough and the fringe and the fairway. We're saying here that we need to have it be in similar conditions. So even though the one club length might move us to the second cut or even the fairway, we're not going to be putting it back there because that's not similar to where the ball was previously. Okay, another exception, lie a ball worsen when or after a ball is lifted or moved and before it is replaced. Okay, so this is covered under a different rule. And unless the lie was worsened when play was stopped and the ball was lifted, in which case this rule applies. Okay, so when can you not restore a worsened condition? Something happens. So if the conditions affecting the stroke are worsened by the player by a natural object or by natural forces such as wind or water, the player must not improve those worsened conditions in breach of Rule 8.1a, except as allowed in 8.1c, 8.1c, yeah. So I think a good, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a good example of this would be if you have a pine cone that blew off a tree and landed on top of your ball, or let's just say right on top of your ball. If you did move it, your ball would move. In that case, you're just going to have to accept what naturally happened and play forward.
The big book says a branch falls from a tree and doesn't move your ball.
Right.
The other one, or a signpost blows over.
It's the old half-eaten pear.
But if you
What page is that?
you
have it?
124 in the big book.
Okay, so 8.1D2 interpretation. So examples of when restoration is not allowed includes when, as Jim was saying, a branch falls from a tree and alters the lie of the player's ball or the area of his or her stance or swing without causing the ball to move. A signpost or other obstruction falls over or is blown into a position that alters one or more conditions affecting the stroke. And then it says see Rule 15.2 and Rule 16.1 for what relief might be from the obstruction. So in that case, we're going to get relief, but for this tree branch that falls, again, if it's loose, we can move that, but we have to be careful in that if it does cause our ball to move, then we're going to have an issue. And so these are natural things that are happening. The key word there is natural. So something that happens, wind or gravity or something, but if it's something that is, as we talked about before, by any person other than the player, or by an animal or an artificial object, a lawnmower or something like that, that's something that can be fixed or improved or whatever the correct terminology is.
So that's what that's saying is you can't put the branch back.
It is.
You can't
I
put
like
it back.
The branch was gonna be a loose impediment.
Entitled to
Because
the
what the branch is on your
last
ball.
shot
If
to
your ball
me.
moves, then you can pull it.
You don't wanna move the ball,
Varies
you take the
that
branch
without-
off, but you can't move the ball.
Right, and the other thing too is you can think about it. It could also help you as well. So think about there's an overhanging branch and it's in your way, and then all of a sudden a big gust of wind comes up and it blows down. Well, you just got an easier shot now. So it can help and hurt you in these cases. And so if we did stick to the principle of we're always entitled to the shot we always had, well, in that case we'd have to go up and tape the tree back in place. So is that really practical?
Duct
tape.
tape.
Right.
That's
Right.
That's
Right.
yeah.
You need that duct tape again.
Well, some of us do. Yeah, some of us do.
But that's what I'm trying to understand. Examples of the condition altered by natural forces where a player is not allowed to restore the worsened condition. So again, the tree fell over. I'm not allowed to replant the tree. Some of this stuff just kind of odd, but
Correct.
so I'm trying to think of something where this, I mean, if the branch fell off, but I can remove the branch as long as the ball doesn't move.
Right.
Well, this was the,
But I can't put the branch back.
You
I can
can
just
if you want
remove
to,
it.
but that's when you
in
run
the
out of
old
tape.
book,
But if I run out of
in the
time.
old book, it was always sticking the balls in a bunker
Right.
and leaves and branches fall out of a
Right.
tree,
Right.
that you
Yeah.
couldn't touch them because God did it to
Right.
you. Or if you did it to yourself. I once took a practice swing and my divot went right onto my ball in the bunker. Really stupid. But if another player
Been there,
does,
done that.
but
So,
if
yeah.
another player does that, see, you could move it. So I think it's a holdover. Because now, can't you remove those things?
Mhm.
Right.
Okay.
In a bunker, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Do that in high
I
school?
can't imagine this even coming up anymore.
Yeah,
Because
it's
anything that falls like that's gonna be a loose impediment.
right.
I'm just trying to again, frame it to make some sense out of it, but it doesn't.
Yeah, I
So
think this.
I would
this
agree
is-
with what you just said.
Yeah, I think Gene, you put it great. Is that this is something that is in there because it has to be, but you know the amount of times that we're going to encounter it is very small. But I'm not. I mean, you know,
And I guarantee you
now
it'll
that I
be
say
on the
that,
test.
it's gonna
be on the
yeah,
test.
exactly.
But it'll happen next
Right,
week and then the week after
exactly.
too.
As will 99 other things that are just like
Yeah.
that could happen if and when the world turns back.
Right.
Don't play in conditions where a tree is gonna blow down on your ball.
Right. You just got to find those courses without trees.
Becoming more common.
Yes.
All right, and then this bottom note, you'll see this a lot in what we cover the rest of the day today. But see rules 2.2 and 23.5. But basically, in partner play, either partner may act for the side, and the action of the partner is treated as actions by the player. And then that also goes for the player's side, which includes their caddies as well. All right, 8.2, players' deliberate actions, keyword deliberate, actions to alter other physical conditions to affect the player's own ball at rest or stroke to be made. So the really creative title here for 8.2a, when 8.2 applies. This rule only covers a player's deliberate actions to alter other physical conditions to affect his or her ball at rest or stroke to be made. This rule does not apply to a player's actions to deliberately deflect or stop his or her own ball, or to deliberately alter any physical conditions to affect where the ball might come to rest. That's in Rule 11. Or alter the player's conditions affecting the stroke, which is covered by what we just talked about in 8.1. Okay, so a player must not deliberately take any actions listed in Rule 8.1a, except as allowed in Rule 8.1b, C, or D, to alter any such physical conditions to affect where the player's ball might go or come to rest after his or her next stroke or later stroke. So again, this is just saying that we talked about this before. We were in the bunker raking. We don't want to rake in front of it because our next stroke might be there. Where the player's ball at rest might go or come to rest if it moves before the stroke is made. So your ball is on a steep slope and you see there are a bunch of divot holes. You can't go and replace those divot holes knowing that your ball might come back there. But you can fix those divot holes if you want, if you're caring for the course. So it's a fine line, and this is something that I know some people that they've talked about. One of the more confusing parts about it is what's deliberate, what's not deliberate, and I think that's something that is more in focus now with these rules, as you know, more than it has been in the past. And we talked about actions care for the course. We just talked about that, and same situation here that we talked before in partner play. We're talking about if there's action on behalf of the side, it's for everyone involved in that team.
Again, the big book at page 126 has a great example. Guy's in a bunker, person's in a bunker, hits the ball out. The bunker's steep, so they put the rake down, really not thinking.
Yeah.
But then they get up to their ball and they think, you know, I'm not going to move it because it could keep my ball out. If the player admits to that intent, there's a penalty. On the other hand, if that rake was there because the preceding group had left the rake there, then even though they formed the intent, you've got no obligation to move the rake and you're okay.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are good examples there. That's a good interpretation there. That's 8.2b/1. That's on the page 126 in the official guide. Okay, 8.3a, when 8.3 applies. More creativity here. This includes, or this rule only covers a player's deliberate actions to alter physical condition to affect another player's ball at rest or stroke to be made by that other player. It doesn't apply to actions taken to deliberately deflect or stop another player's ball, which is covered in 11. So it's only for another player's ball when the ball is at rest. Okay, and so this is just saying that another player can't improve or worsen the conditions affecting the stroke of another player. So you got someone that Bob and I are playing, and Bob's tied for the lead, and I'm in DFL, and I go up and say, "Oh, Bob, there's that tree in your way, and I really want you to win. I can't go break that branch for Bob, even though I love to do that." But that's what this is saying. And then on the flip side is that I can't be bitter at Bob and go take a bunch of divots around his ball, saying, "No, that'll teach him a lesson." Okay, and then this is just saying that alter any other physical conditions to affect where another player's ball might go or come to rest after that player's next stroke or later stroke, or where another player's ball at rest might go or come to rest if it moves before the stroke is made. So same actions we talked about before. In this case, it's really just talking about instead of your ball, it's another player's ball. All right, we'll move on to 9. Any questions about 8? Okay. All right, ball played as it lies. Again, this is another one of these central principles that we have in regards to the rule. We're going to play the ball as it lies. If you're a good golfer, this is a really easy rule to follow. But if you're not, then you're going to have to deal with sometimes you can't play it as it lies, or you don't want to. It's on the cart path or something like that. So it covers that central principle. The player's ball comes to rest and is then moved by natural forces such as wind or water. The player normally must play it from its new spot. We'll talk about one situation where it's not going to play from its next spot. And Ricky Fowler found out about that as well this last weekend. If a ball at rest is lifted or moved by anyone or any outside influence before the stroke is made, the ball must be replaced on its original spot. And then players should take care when near any ball at rest, and a player who causes his or her own ball or an opponent's ball to move will normally get a penalty, except on the putting green. And so another key thing here, Rule 9 applies to a ball in play at rest on the course and applies both during a round and while play is stopped under Rule 5.7a. All right, so 9.1a, playing ball from where it came to rest. So player's ball at rest on the course must be played as it lies, except when the rules require or allow the player to do otherwise. So there's obviously some examples we know about where they can take relief, etc. Some examples to play a ball from another place in the course, or to lift a ball and then replace it on its original spot. What to do when the ball moves during the backswing or during the stroke? So if a player's ball at rest begins moving after the player has begun their stroke, okay, so what's the definition of a stroke again?
Forward movement of the club when you hit the ball.
Tend to hit it.
And it talks about it's a forward movement, right? So not in the backswing once we start going down, correct?
Right, but this is for the backswing also.
Right, so this is covering both. But when we see the word stroke, it is just talking about the downswing. All right. Forward movement, just like you said there. And then the ball, so then the player's ball at rest begins moving after the player's begun a stroke, or backswing for the stroke, and the player goes on to make the stroke. The ball must not be replaced no matter what caused it to move. So this is the same kind of thing that we had before, was that we're as long as the stroke is continuing to be made, and they don't stop or check their downswing, we're gonna play the ball from where it ended up.
So if you teed the ball up on a real windy day and you didn't do it correctly, and you start your stroke and you're coming down on the back or on the downswing, the ball rolls off the tee, you better try to hit it.
Well, you can stop.
Check your swing.
Yeah, you can stop
If you're tight.
in that
I know.
case. You don't need it to necessarily try to hit it in that case. And we're going to get to this. So basically,
Right.
if it does move, we're going to have to figure out why it moved, right? And then it's going to be, well, was it the player or was it natural forces or what caused it to move, right? But you as you said in that case, you can still continue to hit that shot, and if you do, we're just going to play it as it lies.
But if you check it, what this is saying is you can put it back on the tee.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Nine
Stays in the
1B.
teen area.
Right. That was
If you check it. Yeah.
The heading is backswing or swing,
Right.
but it says this, and player goes on to make the stroke.
Right.
right. So if
If you didn't
if we
make the
stop,
stroke,
we're gonna put it back.
The Tiger Woods.
Well, I guess first we're gonna
Find
at
out
that
why.
point we're gonna find out what happened. If the player did cause it to move and you stopped, we're gonna put it back, and then we're gonna have a penalty. If the player didn't cause it to move, it moved by natural causes, then we're gonna play it from where it came to rest.
If the player caused it to move and stops, there was never a stroke, so the ball was never in play.
right.
Right.
And since you're in the teeing area, you can then re-tee it or put it on the
Yeah.
ground or move it
Yeah,
anywhere
you can do
within
all
the
those
teeing
things.
area.
Yeah.
But I was talking about outside the team area.
Oh,
No, I was talking in the tee.
You were talking. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Sometimes when you tee it up,
Yeah.
you're not paying attention. You're putting it on the slant. You don't even look at it. You begin your stroke.
Yeah. In that case, you can just put it back. There's no penalty in the team area. Even if you cause it to move, if you weren't trying to hit it,
Right.
you're waggling and you accidentally knock it, no penalty. Just re-tee. Okay, and then this is just saying that if the player did cause the ball to move, so again, in this case we're really not talking specifically about the teen area. We're talking about somewhere other than the teen area. If the player caused the ball to move, we need to see the rule in the future, 9.4b, to find out if there's a penalty. And we'll get to that, but basically that's where we're going to determine if the player did indeed cause it to move, and then find out where it happened so that we can either assess penalty or not based on where it happened on the course. All right, so this rule here is really kind of gets back to a small, not necessarily a change that they've made, but they have added one kind of determining characteristic that really wasn't in the rules before, and determining whether the ball moves. And really, this all stems back to what happened with Dustin Johnson at Oakmont, where they sat on the 5th green or whatever it was and tried to figure out whether his ball did indeed cause it to move. And so basically, what they've done is they've added this known or virtually certain principle that we've talked about with water hazards before, and now penalty areas. And now we're going to use that same principle to determine whether the ball or whether the player, whether the ball moved, and then if indeed the player did cause it to move. So if a player's ball at rest is treated as having moved only if it is known or virtually certain that it did. So if the ball might have moved, but this is not known or virtually certain, it is treated as not having moved and must be played as it lies. Okay, and then deciding what caused the ball to move. We need to figure out if it's the player or something else, natural forces, some other outside influence possibly that caused the ball to move. This determines whether the player must replace the ball or play it as it lies, and whether there is a penalty or not. So the folks at the USGA and RNA think that there's 4 possible causes when deciding whether a ball has moved. So there's only 4 possible causes, so we don't need to think about anything else other than what they've listed here. Natural forces such as wind or water, the player, including the player's caddy, the opponent in match play, including the opponent's caddy, or an outside influence, including any other player in stroke play. So those are the four possible causes for a ball at rest to be moved. And so we talked about, again, this known or virtual certainty standard for deciding what caused it to move. The player, the opponent, or an outside influence is treated as having caused the ball to move only if it is known or virtually certain to be the cause. So again, think about it, known or virtual certainty. If we go to the definitions on page 208 in the small book, and basically it talks about the easiest way to understand this is that it talks about 95%. So if this happens 20 times, 19 of these times it has to happen in order for us to be known, or in order for us to be certain. And so that's one thing. And then it also talks about whether if there is conclusive evidence that the event in question happened to the player's ball, such as when the player or other witnesses saw it happen. So and then we have to take all reasonably available information, includes all information the player knows and all other information he or she can get with reasonable effort and without unreasonable delay. And so in that case, for us, it's going to be talking with spectators if they saw it, other people that are out there. We're going to gather that information to get the right ruling. And on the big stage, it's looking at maybe video or looking at blimp footage or something like that to get that information. We can do that if we need to. And that's just what this is saying here, is that we have to look at all reasonably available information. But again, we can't delay play when we're gathering this information. So if the ball is moved by natural forces, so wind or water cause the player's ball to move, there's going to be no penalty, and the ball must be replayed from its new spot. However, there's one exception, and that is a new rule change that happened because of what happened in 2015 at Augusta to Billy Horschel. He marked his ball on the putting green, picked it up, and then replaced it, and then walked around the other side of the hole because he had a 50-foot putt, and then a big gust of wind blew up, and his ball rolled back into the water hazard, and he had to take relief from the water hazard and play out. Now, when we'll cover this when we get to 13, but now as long as you mark the ball, you lift it, and you replace it, you're entitled to that spot. And if the ball does move by natural forces after that, you're still going to get to put it back there. But in Ricky's case, this weekend, he didn't mark it, nor could he have marked it because he was not on the green. But in his case, his ball was dropped, right? Or did he place that one?
He had to place it because of two drops.
He did drop
He dropped it. Then he placed it. But anyways, it was there, and then wind or something caused it to move. Natural forces caused it to move, and then he had to take it another. He took another drop, correct? Another drop, and then
from another
penalty.
Well, he dropped twice again.
Right, and then he placed back again. Right. So and that rule didn't change. That was always the case. But we are going to have this one exception where if it's on the putting green now, and we do those two things or three things, we lift it, we mark it, we lift it, and we replace it. We have that spot on the course. That's our spot. And if it does move by natural force after that, we are going to place it back. That's the only scenario. So what I'm telling, when I do these college clinics, what I'm telling the teams is that if their ball is on a downhill slope, don't mark it. And when it's on an uphill slope, mark it. Because if it's on a downhill slope and they don't mark it and the wind blows it closer, then they can play it.
Pretty smart guy.
Yeah.
It's the marking that becomes important.
All right. And then,
This one might come up.
huh?
This one might come up this summer.
The putting
This-
green or
yeah,
this?
the ball.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. And the other thing too, I kind of glossed over it too, but when we were talking about all reasonable information, some of the other stuff that we're looking at too is, how windy is it? What are the greens cut to? If we're at, Oakland Hills and at Oakland Hills South and Oakland Hills and Battle Creek, we're probably going to have different rulings on those greens because the green speeds are different, right? And so we're looking at a lot of different things, not just what the player says in those cases.
Players are going to get this confused.
Yeah.
You mean the difference between?
Well, they're going to just think, not realize that this is an exception. They're going to think that applies to everything. There are two different things here.
Yeah.
There's no penalty and balls played from its new spot. And in this case, one case, it's not.
Except for on the putting green.
Yeah,
And except if you.
And they're not going to read the except.
no.
Right.
Uh-uh.
But I think that it's
So they're going to
something
want to
that-
put the ball back.
Well, they're going to think that they play it from the new location.
Mhm.
Because the ball has clung there, and that's been what they've been doing.
Right.
And
Oh.
now, if they've lifted it and marked it, they're supposed to put it back.
Mhm.
They own that spot.
Yeah.
I think that you'll definitely see that at the the amateur and senior level where the players are going to decide on their own. If it's a college kid, they're going to look around at the other people and then they're going to call a rules official. And I think that the smart players are going to do that and not decide for themselves. Especially this year, they've got kind of an easy excuse to do that because the rules are changed. And I think they're going to rely on us more than ever. And for them, that's probably not a bad idea, to be honest. I mean, I do the same thing if I was in their shoes. I would wait for them to pull me over there and tell them the wrong thing, and then they'd be okay and not get a penalty. So,
We'll be telling them all the wrong things. So
Right.
it'll be all good.
They're going to need 3 officials at each hole.
Yeah, it's in there.
Maybe
really are-
three, so you got
What
somebody
you
to
said
break
earlier,
the
Kyle,
tie.
is really important. If you're on, if your ball can roll downhill, don't mark it.
Yeah, that's good.
That'll speed up play. Just don't mark your ball. But if,
right.
I
Does-
mean,
If it's on the front side of the Donald Ross, make sure you get it marked.
mark the ball.
Yeah.
Why?
Fix it up.
I think time will change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I mean,
18 of Plum Hollow, he's not gonna mark his ball anymore if the flag's
No way.
at the bottom and his ball.
no way in God's green earth am I touching that ball if it's above the hole.
Right.
Ain't gonna happen.
Because
Right.
you never know when it's going to go.
You never know when it's gonna go.
Right.
Just like Augusta 16.
Hope for a win, huh?
Yeah, well, more often than not, you can stand there and look at that ball and it'll start rolling.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Calvin, you're
Especially in
the same
August.
Right. No, that's
But he won't tell us.
I'm not telling anybody else.
Your wife.
Sure, I will, yeah.
Jerry.
By the way,
Oh, wow.
All right. 9.4. So ball lifted or moved by a player. This rule applies only when it is known or virtually certain that a player, including the player's caddy, lifted his or her ball at rest or caused it to move. So if the player lifts his or her ball at rest or causes it to move, the ball must be replaced on its original spot, which, if not known, must be estimated. Except when a player lifts a ball under a rule to take relief or to replace the ball in a different spot, we don't need to put it back on the exact spot. When the ball moves only after the player has begun the stroke or does backswing for the stroke and then goes on to make the stroke, we talked about that before.
Mhm.
We're going to play that as it lies. And now we're talking about when we cause the ball to move, when we're going to get a penalty and when we're not. So if the player lifts or deliberately touches the ball, touches his or her ball at rest or causes it to move, the player gets one penalty stroke. So if we're in the fairway and we determine that the player caused the ball to move, they're going to get a 1-stroke penalty. Right?
Why is that deliberately touches
Instead of
instead of accidentally?
you can accidentally, when you're adjusting your ball, as long as it doesn't move, it can oscillate or jiggle,
Mhm.
and that's okay, no penalty.
I'm not sure.
Oh, I am.
Yeah.
Well, here, that's.
Yeah,
That was good. I like that.
I'm going with you.
That's no change.
If, for example, I'm in the general area
Uh-huh.
and I bend down and rotate my
Oh,
ball.
I'm
I
gonna
mean,
say
I
that.
haven't moved it.
That, you
No.
can't do that, Jim.
No,
That's
can't touch
deliberately touching.
You can't touch
But
it.
if you're
But if you-
addressing the
if you
ball
set
with
the
your
club down-
club and you set the club down.
And you accidentally-
Except we're not addressing the ball anymore. That's not in the rule.
Okay,
Right.
if you're getting ready to hit it and you
Okay.
touch it with your ball and it doesn't move, but it oscillates, you haven't deliberately, it was accidentally,
Yeah.
you're not gonna get a penalty.
Set your club
Okay.
down, pull your club back a little bit, and the ball just rotates.
Shake.
If
Doesn't
it
move.
shakes and it
Yeah,
doesn't move,
it doesn't move.
If it leaves its
Yes.
spot and comes to
Yeah.
somewhere else.
When you're in the deeper route.
unless that's been
Like it happens a
changed.
lot,
That
No,
hasn't been
no,
changed.
there's in the definitions under move,
Oh.
it talks about this. So,
but-
the thing that we're talking about is it says if the ball at rest only wobbles, sometimes referred to as oscillating, and stays on or returns to its original spot, the ball has not moved. And then it also, just to read the entire definition, it starts with when a ball at rest has left its original spot and comes to rest in any other spot, and this can be seen by the naked eye, whether or not anyone actually sees it do so. And then this applies when whether the player's ball has gone up, down, or horizontally in any direction away from its original spot. But if it does oscillate or wobble, but doesn't go into a new spot, it hasn't moved.
And if you address the ball with an iron, you're in the deeper rough or whatever. And when you lightly ground your club and the ball rests against the face of the club itself, and it oscillates, well, then you take it back, the ball just oscillates. It does not move from that position, but it actually did touch the face of the club. There's no penalty because it's still in the original spot.
Hmm?
Yes.
I can
yes.
see that happening in the deeper grass
Mhm.
more than in the fairway. You gently, it's oscillating, you gently take your club back and it doesn't do anything.
Right. I think too, maybe just another example, and this is probably not a great, maybe it's not a good example, but when a player, let's say that your ball is oscillating, if you were to touch it and purposely touch it to stop it from moving, that would be a deliberate touch of the ball there in that case where you would get a penalty for doing that. All right, there are 4 exceptions to this small rule. All right. Exception 1, the player is allowed to lift or move the ball. There's no penalty when the player lifts the ball or causes it to move under a rule that allows the ball to be lifted and then replaced on its original spot. So picking up the ball on the putting green. Requires a move ball to be replaced on its original spot, or requires or allows a player to drop or place a ball again, or to play a ball from a different place. Exception 2, accidental move before the ball is found. So there's no penalty when the player accidentally causes the ball to move while trying to find it or identify it. We talked about that earlier today. And then accidental movement of the ball on the putting green. So we've all had this local rule be in place for the last couple of years. Now it is a rule of golf. So any accidental movement of the ball on the putting green, there's no penalty. Just going to put it back and play on. And then it talks about that it's no matter how it happens. So whether it's I accidentally kick it, I touch it with my club, the ball marker, I drop my ball marker and it moves it. That's all going to just be accidental, and we're going to put it back. And that's only on the it's only on the putting green where we're avoiding penalty in that case.
Kyle.
Yes.
And 9.4b starts out with lifts or deliberately touches. All the exceptions are accidental.
Correct. Yeah. Exception 2 and 3. Yeah, that's a good point to point out there. A good thing to point out there.
Yeah, it's either the rule allows it or it's accidental.
Right.
That's how they differentiate between deliberately and accidentally.
Mm-hmm. And then exception 4, so accidental movement anywhere except on the putting green while applying the rules. So there's no penalty if the player accidentally causes the ball to move anywhere except on the putting green while taking reasonable actions to mark the spot of the ball or lift or replace the ball when allowed to do so, remove a movable obstruction. So no penalty if your ball is resting up against a rake, you mark the spot with a tee in the bunker, the ball is hanging up against the rake, you mark the spot with the tee, you lift the rake, and the ball moves, no penalty, but we're going to put the ball back where we had our tee, where we marked it there, and then play on from there if we get the ball to rest at that point. Restore worsen conditions, we talked about that earlier, when allowed to do so, or take relief under a rule, including in determining whether relief is available under a rule, such as swinging the club to see if there is interference from a condition, or where to take relief, such as determining the nearest point of complete relief. Or when we're measuring, if we accidentally cause the ball to move, in that case, there's no penalty. And then again, this is just common thing that we've seen is that this is just our 2 + 1 = 2. If we do end up playing incorrectly substitute the ball or playing from the wrong place, we're just going to get the general penalty and not this additional 1-stroke penalty for causing the ball to move.
And again, there are a couple of interesting examples in the big book. 136 and 7. One is you're not penalized if you move the ball during search. So the example they use is the golfer hits their ball into a bad area. Unbeknownst to the golfer, it's hit a tree and bounced back. Golfer is not paying any attention, walking up the fairway, accidentally kicks the ball. Penalty. Mm-hmm. That wasn't during search.
Right.
The other one, if the golfer lifts their ball to take relief and then doesn't take relief at 1. I know. That's why I said they're interested.
You mean if they don't mark it?
No. Let's say,
or if they cause a ball. It was your question, right? That we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, we take. Yeah. You're in an abnormal course condition. You lift your ball, then you decide,
I'd rather play it here.
Right.
1.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's not a change to any rule, though.
No,
right. Correct.
This is where they point out that that's the way that works.
Correct. Yeah, that's always been the case, and that's one common example that we talk about is that we always when players are taking relief from a cart path, they're taking nearest point of complete relief. We want to make sure they know where they're going to take relief before they actually pick up their ball, because they may want to play from that original spot. But if they do pick up the ball and they don't think about it, they can always go back there and place it back with the 1-stroke penalty.
Jim, I read the same thing, but this is 9-4B2. If you were smart and you didn't know exactly where the ball went when you teed off and you thought it was in the wooded area, I would, as soon as I teed off and started walking, I said, well, I'm going to start searching for my ball. I mean, this is silly.
No, that's another erasure rule. If you kick it in the middle of the fairway, we're going to erase what you said.
But then you only have 3 minutes to get there.
Right.
Then you only have 3 minutes to get there.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, I think at that interpretation 9.4B/2. I think that's that is a good one to read, and I think it is interesting because there is some gray area there as to what. I mean, if you're 20 yards short of where the ball is or you think is, I mean, you're at that point. If you're a player, you're still looking. I mean, you're not just. I think it'd be one thing if you're just if Mike and I are walking in the fairway and we're talking to each other and we kick it, whereas opposed if I'm just walking right at the hazard. I mean, I'm really starting to look when I get around that area. But I guess if it's 100 yards short of the penalty area, not hazard, then this interpretation would apply.
We'll get into the stopwatch later.
When the search starts,
just clicks his button. Jeannie's right.
Starts with.
When do you start the search? Right.
Yeah. As soon as you get in the area where.
Ball.
Yeah, Yeah, so it's
Especially with 3 minutes.
it's when the player or their caddy gets in the general area where the
General area.
ball is going to be. So, and the question that I got from, and this is for somebody that worked at college events, I got this from one of the coaches, and I don't know the answer to it. But in some rules, the coach, this could apply to high school too, the coach or the advice giver is given the same relationship as the caddy. So one of the rules that we'll talk about in a second with lining players up, that's the case. But, you know, the question that I had and that the coach had was, well, what happens if I'm looking for a player's ball, does it start where I'm there? Or is there some local rule or some rule in their hard card that doesn't give that right to the coach or the advice giver? So I think that's something that we'll have to figure out. Not necessarily for GAM events, but for the high school and for the college events that we
Might be
do.
back in the team rule.
It could be there, yeah. Have to take a look and see. I haven't got that far, but
The high school events, and a lot of times when I'm assigned a hole or something, or I'm rover, and the college coach is up there with me, and one of his competitors tees off, goes right into the woods. Him or her and I immediately go over there and start searching for the ball. I don't start the time
Right.
until the competitor gets up there. I think that would be unfair, but
Which the competitor, or the competitor caddy or their side
right.
starts the
But
search.
he mentioned a good thing is,
Yeah, what about,
what is the
does the coach count as part of the side?
yeah. And once we figure that out, we'll let everyone know. But I think it's something that we'll have to clarify, especially for those of you that are working high school regionals and know how that's going to be handled. Because I mean that's it.
I'm not telling the coach. I know that.
All right. Let's try to get through a few more slides here. Ball lifted or moved by opponent in match play. So this rule applies when it's known to virtually certain that the opponent, including their opponent's caddy, lifted a player's ball at rest or caused it to move. If the opponent plays the player's ball as a wrong ball, that's covered under a different rule, not this rule. And if the opponent lifts or moves the player's ball at rest, the ball must be replaced on its original spot, which if it's not known must be estimated. However, we can move a ball at rest. An opponent can if they're conceding the next stroke, the hole, or the match, or when the opponent lifts or moves the ball at the player's request because the player intends to apply a rule or take relief or to replace the ball in a different spot. So if I'm down in the penalty area and Frank says, I'm going to take relief, go ahead and grab it for me. That's fine. There's no penalty there. But if I do lift or deliberately touch the player's ball at rest or cause it to move, I'm going to get a one-stroke penalty in match play if I do that to my opponent. But there are several exceptions.
1, 2, 3.
Exception 1, opponent allowed to lift player's ball. There's no penalty when the opponent lifts the ball when conceding the next stroke. We just talked about that or at the player's request. Exception 2, marking and lifting a player's ball on the putting green made by mistake. If I accidentally mark the wrong ball, that's okay. There's no penalty there. Same exceptions for the player that we talked about previously. So if we go back to .4, we've got exceptions 2, 3, and 4. So that's some of those accidental movements that we talked about previously.
So they don't differentiate finding and identifying and not looking, searching. In other words, no penalty under search in the old book. So now it doesn't matter whether he's searching or not. There's no penalty if the opponent causes it to move?
No, there is, except for the exceptions, which searching is one of those exceptions. So in exception 3, it says the same exceptions for the players. So those are those.
Okay.
So exception 2 talks about the accidental move before the ball is found, back in 9.4b. So in that case, if it's during search, it's okay. But if I cause the player's ball to move just in the middle of the fairway because I just kicked it. Now that's going to be a 1-stroke penalty. All right, 9.6. Let's see if we can finish 9 here today. I think we can get there. This deals with an outside influence. So if it's known or virtually certain that an outside influence, including another player in stroke play, another ball lifted or moved a player's ball, there's no penalty, and the ball is going to be replaced in its original spot. Or if we're not exactly sure of the spot, we're going to estimate it. So we've all seen this happen before. This has always been the case on the putting green. And really, it's always been the case for outside agency or outside influence. But now we're just going to put it back where it was, and if we don't know the exact spot, we're going to estimate it and place it. So the same thing where you hit a ball on the green, person that you're playing with hits your ball on the green. You don't know, you're going to get up there and put it back where it was before that. Your ball was hit and moved. So that same principle is now applying, everywhere on the course, but which it always has. But now we're going to place the ball if we don't know the exact spot. But if it's not known or virtually certain that the ball was lifted or moved, then the ball is lost, and the player must take relief under stroke and distance. So if we hit the ball on the middle of the fairway and unbeknownst to us, it's down a hill, we go down the hill and our ball isn't there, and we don't know that some dog came and picked up the ball and ran away with it. We just have to assume that it's lost and go back to the tee. But if we saw the dog run away with the ball, or some spectator said, "Hey, that dog or that seagull picked up the ball and ran with it," then we have it known or virtual certainty. We can put the ball where we think it was, place the ball where we think it was, and then move on.
But again, great example, although I don't know that it helps. Where's it at? Page, I think, 142 in the big book. The group can't see the green. Green is elevated. And up at the green, of course, is a bunker, penalty area, general area. So you've got 4 specific areas. The only one we've left out is the tee. You get up there and you see a person that looks over their shoulder, sees you, and drops the ball.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody can see where the ball was. To me, it doesn't give us much guidance. All it concludes with is saying that it would be reasonable for the player to conclude that the ball should be replaced in the general area.
Why?
Well, if it's his ball, yes. If it's my ball, it's reasonable to conclude it was on the
green.
I know.
Wait a minute, now I get it.
I mean, Jeannie's taught us for years and years that the rules abhor a do-over. Drafter of the rules will do virtually anything to keep you from taking a stroke over. But I mean, here you really have no way of knowing which of those 4 areas the ball ended up in. Well, I would say this, except probably not the bunker. Probably not, because if the guy went in the bunker to get your ball, he'd have left it. I mean, hard to believe he'd go in, grab the ball, and then break the bunker.
It'd leave a good track.
Yeah, it's interesting that interpretation about why they think it's reasonable that it's in the general area. Maybe it's just because it's in the middle of
Possible that the general area is the largest of the areas.
Right.
And it's middle ground.
Right, exactly.
It's not the best and it's not the worst.
Right.
It's sort of,
Yeah.
But you're going to use reasonable judgment, right? So I mean, if the player's dead set that they stuffed that shot and it's on the green, then they're going to.
It'd be pretty hard to be lost.
Well, it could just be some guy just picked it and ran away with it. Someone in the group ahead is 2 strokes down and they need to make up some ground quickly. All right, rule 9.7. We're almost done here. All right. The ball marker lifted or moved. So the rule covers what to do if a ball marker that is marking the spot of a lifted ball is moved or moved before the ball is replaced. If the player's ball marker is lifted or moved in any way, including by natural forces, before the ball is replaced, the player must either replace the ball in its original spot, which if not known must be estimated, or replace a ball marker to mark that original spot. And then if a player or his position, or if the player or his or her opponent in match play lifts the player's ball marker or causes it to move, when the ball is lifted and not yet replaced, the player or opponent gets 1 penalty stroke. Exception. Rule 9.4b and 9.5b. Exceptions applying to lifting and moving ball marker or causing it to move. In all cases where the player or opponent gets no penalty for lifting the player's ball or accidentally causing it to move, there is no penalty for lifting or accidentally moving the player's ball marker. So we're using those same, and I think in this case there's like 6 or 7 exceptions that are going to apply where there isn't going to be a penalty for a ball marker being lifted or removed.
So I mark my ball in the green with a magnetic ball mark. And my opponent goes up with their putter and taps it down
and picks it up,
turns around and walks away
I had that happen.
with my ball mark attached to his putter.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a great example.
That's
of
a
what this
perfect
is.
example of that.
Yep.
Okay. I get to go put it back as near as possible to the spot where
Right, and you can place the ball or the marker
or the
back,
marker,
and you just estimate the spot at that point.
Does he get the
Does he
stroke?
get a stroke?
The
The other
opponent?
guy, the guy that did it by accident?
No, there's no penalty for causing the ball or ball marker to move on the green.
Yeah, on the green. But if that happened in the fairway, it would be a
in the
penalty.
fairway it's penalty. Yeah.
If you don't see anything, and he makes a stroke with that putter, with the ball.
With the-
You got him.
Then I got him. In match play, play hole. In stroke play, he gets penalty stroke.
Can't change.
Not from non-conforming club.
Characteristic of the putter.
Yeah.
He added weight to
I
it.
don't know. It's probably
Can't
that probably is the
change
rule.
Sorry, didn't mean to bring that up, Kyle.
Right. No, it's interesting. Yeah, I don't know about that. I'm not going to say that it's wrong because I think it is right, but
I think it is too. I don't think that's bad.
did he?
Yeah, because he pulled out his putter and all of a sudden he saw a ball marker was stuck to the bottom of it. Actually,
Ah.
Mark Wilson talks about it.
Okay.
So then they have to
Well, that's
decide, did he ever
definitely
make a stroke with it? So
Okay.
they were looking at films and everything, and Fluff was getting upset, and he wanted a ruling, and so Mark Wilson says, well, go tell your boss that you may get a 2-stroke penalty, and Fluff says, I'm not touching it.
I'm not touching it.
So after several holes, they finally decided he didn't make a stroke.
Okay. Interesting.
Myrtle Beach, okay.
So don't use magnet clips when you're marking.
Yeah,
balls.
duh.
All right. I think it's 12:05, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's gonna. We got through 3 rules today, which is good. Not great, but we're gonna get through some more next week. So we'll definitely cover 10, 11, and then try to get into 12 and 13 as well. But we'll have a lot to talk about with 10. Maybe it's a blessing in disguise we didn't get the 10 because hopefully we'll have some further clarification from the USGA on what lining up a player is. They said that they'd have that out relatively soon. So hopefully we'll have some further clarification on that because I guess just really quickly if I get to it. Just so that people if you need to go, you can go obviously, but this is the picture that's in the book and what happened with Denny McCarthy and apparently Justin Thomas as well. I mean, as I was telling people earlier, the picture on the right where it says "Not Allowed" looks very, very similar to what happened. Maybe it's one frame earlier where he starts. His club is now over the ball as opposed to just a foot or so off to the side. But I think they'll definitely provide some further clarification on this. But I think right now, if I was officiating a tournament, I would have a hard time calling a penalty on this. unless I knew that the player or the caddy said something to line the player up, because there is this gray area that the USGA and RNA and PGA have created because of this.
Well, Kyle, the rule wasn't gray at all. Okay, people just don't like it.
Right. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
The rule was clean. Right. Everything I attended where we talked about this rule, they said it's going to be a problem because you're going to penalize people because they're not going to understand what the rule means. But as soon as the rule says as soon as 1 foot goes into position and the caddy's standing on that line, you've incurred a penalty. And off the green, there's nothing you can do to rescind it.
Right.
No, and the one on TV was just a terrific example. The guy was standing there and maybe his putter was 4 inches from the ball.
Right.
He took a couple of practice swings and then walked around behind the ball and then came back, took his stance and putted. You'd have to have a micrometer to know whether that first position was the same position as he putted from.
Yeah, on the green, it doesn't matter.
And step forward.
On the green,
On the green, if he backed away from the stance, he could
doesn't matter.
retake it.
No.
If the caddy's not on the line. Okay.
You said he was talking about putting.
Oh, my mistake.
Yes.
He was back just on the other side of the
He was
water.
taking practice swings in proximity to where he might have taken a stance,
Exactly.
to then move forward to get to the hitting position. So he was standing back here taking practice swings,
It
to,
looked to me on TV like
yeah.
when he actually took his stroke, he was standing incrementally closer to the ball than he had been the first time, in which case he didn't violate the rule.
But he was still not with his club behind the ball with the attempt to hit it on that stroke. He was taking a practice swing with his club aside from the ball. But close.
Was that the same stance or wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was, he's penalized.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what comes out, because there's obviously John, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, it's something that it's pretty cut and dry, but players in the golfing world don't like it, and so it'll be interesting to see how they come up with something that can appease the players, but also not force them to have to reprint books and things like that as well, because it is going to be a clarification of some sort, and it'll be interesting.
Kyle, you've spent a lot of time talking today about how people are always trying to walk up to the edge of the rules. And I think this rule was written so people can't walk on the edge of this rule. Right? If that caddy's on the line, boom, you got a penalty. It's not like he kind of winks when you got your right foot in place and then walks away.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think that this is something that whether the player, I mean, the argument that they made was that it was a 77-yard shot or whatever. So I don't need to get lined up on that, but it just makes it a lot harder on rules officials to determine that if it's not cut and dry as it is now.
Well, Kyle, the real problem is that these players don't read the rules. Okay, I'm really looking forward to see whether they will read the simplified student player version of the rules, which I think is really, really straightforward. Any third grade student should be able to understand it.
Right.
But they don't read it. They don't read it, and that's the whole problem. The caddies don't read them either.
Oh no, for sure. Yeah, I think that's going to continue to be a problem. Hopefully, we'll get more people to read it, like you said, because it is a little bit easier and pictures and everything. But at the end of the day, it's always going to be a big issue, especially when the rules are as complicated as they are.
They're supposed to be simplified.
Right.
Hey, they dropped the word simplified from this list.
Right. Modernized now.
Hey, Robert.
Yes?
Hi, I was just saying hi.
Oh, hello, Jane. How are you?
Okay, are you eating donuts?
I don't have any here. My wife wouldn't let me.
Allowed beyond.
All right, everyone. We'll appreciate everyone taking the time to come out. We will see you guys and ladies next week.
Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you, Kyle.
Hey, thanks, Kyle.
They don't allow us on
Okay.
Facebook.
But there was a closed group that they discussed the rules.
Oh, I wish I could.
Yeah.
Maybe I can do it with my wife.
You can do it there, yeah.
Well, that's how we do
And they only
everything.
ask you 2 questions.